When it comes to 20th century history, there are a few names as well known as that of Adolf Hitler, Germany's leader moving up to and during World War II. However, unlike so many of history's heroes, Adolf Hitler has gone down in the record books for all the wrong reasons. The atrocities committed in his name resulted in deaths of millions of innocent people, and images of people struggling for survival in the concentration camps are related with the reign of terror that Hitler dictated. People today still struggle with how Hitler was able to rise to his power and gain in this situation. With his father only being a civil servant, it must have been the anger that had driven him forward to accomplish what he set out to do. He had become overwhelmed with the power, and so it had led him to spiral out of control. He believes that he was more than a person and rather a ruler among the people. This led him to make arrogant mistakes because he believed he was something more and wanted no advice from his supporters and those around him, getting rid of the people that had told him otherwise. This leads us to ask the question, why was his rise his greatest fall?
The story begins at the end of World War I with the successful Allied advance in 1918. Germany realized that there was no way to win the war, so they signed an armistice that ended all fighting. Germany's imperial government was decimated. Civil agitation and worker strikes spread across the nation. Fearing a communist revolution, the larger parties joined in an attempt to tame uprisings, establishing the parliamentary Weimar Republic. In addition to losing upwards of a tenth of its territory and its army left decimated, Germany had to pay reparations, which debilitated its already weakened economy. This was seen as a humiliation by many nationalists and veterans. They erroneously thought that the war could have been won if the military hadn't been betrayed by politicians and protesters. For Hitler, these views became obsession, and his discriminatory and paranoid delusions led him to blame the Jews. His words found resonance in a society with many anti-Semitic people. At this point in time, hundreds of thousands of Jews had integrated into German society, but many Germans continued to see them as outsiders. They were accused of subversion and profiteering. It cannot be stressed enough that these conspiracies were born out of fear and anger and prejudice, not fact. Nevertheless, Hitler found prosperity with them when joining a small nationalist political party. With his shrewd and crafty public speaking, his leadership progressively drew larger crowds. Merging anti-Semitism with populist resentment, the Nazis denounced both communism and capitalism as Jewish conspiracies to destroy Germany. The Nazi Party was not completely welcomed at first and was banned after an unsuccessful attempt at overthrowing the government. Because of this, Hitler was arrested for treason. After serving about a year in prison, he began to reconstruct the Nazi Party. In 1929, the Great Depression had struck the world by storm. It led to American banks withdrawing their loans from Germany, and the already decimated German economy collapsed overnight. Hitler took advantage of the people's dismay, offering them convenient scapegoats and assurances that would restore Germany to its prior greatness. Main parties proved unable to handle the crisis, while left-wing resistance was too fragmented by internal unrest. Because of this, some of the upset public grouped with the Nazi Party, increasing their parliamentary votes from under 3% to over 18% in just 2 years. In 1932, Hitler ran for president but lost to decorated war hero General von Hindenburg. Although he lost, he earned 36% of the vote, which demonstrated the expanse of his support. Within a year, advisors and business leaders convinced Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as chancellor, hoping to direct his popularity for their own success. Though the chancellor position was not very powerful and was only the administrative head of parliament, he slowly expanded the power of his seat. While his supporters formed paramilitary and fought protesters in the streets, Hitler raised fears of communist uprising and urged that only he could bring back law and order. In 1933, a young worker was convicted of setting fire to the Parliament building. Hitler used this to urge the government to give him special emergency powers. From this point, it only took a few months to abolish the freedom of the press, to disband other parties, and to place anti-Jewish laws. With this in place, Hitler was the new dictator of Germany. Many of his rivals were arrested and executed. When President Hindenburg died in August 1934, it was clear there would be no new election.
Hitler's rise ultimately became his fall. His ever-growing power in Germany seemed to have sealed the fate of the Germans. The trait that ended his reign was his arrogance. After conquering a large portion of Europe, it was still not enough for him. He kept on going. He overestimated what his Nazi army could accomplish and became overambitious with his goals. An example of his arrogance was in the summer of 1942, or the Battle of Stalingrad. Hitler launched a major offensive into southern Russia, seeking to destroy what was left of the Soviet army and ultimately capture the Caucasus oil fields. The initial advance went well, and the German Sixth Army under General Friedrich von Paulus was ordered to capture the city, but Stalin demanded it was defended at all costs. Every available soldier and civilian was mobilized. Stalingrad was heavily bombed by the Luftwaffe, and the ruins became the scenes for months of bitter street fighting. By October, most of the city was in Germany's hands, but the Russians clung onto the banks of the Volga, across which they ferried vital reserves. Meanwhile, Soviet General George Zhukov built up fresh forces on either side of the city, and in November launched a massive assault to surround and trap von Paulus's army. Forbidden to break out by Hitler, the Sixth Army endured until February 1943, when its exhausted remnants surrendered. The Germans lost a total of 500,000 men during the Stalingrad campaign, including 91,000 taken prisoner. Another mistake that Hitler had made was declaring war on the United States. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States had declared war on Japan, but not Germany. Indeed, while the U.S. continued to supply Britain with much-needed supplies, a ground war involving U.S. troops on European soil was not a given. On December 11, 1941, 3 days after Pearl Harbor, Hitler declared war on the United States. However, Germany was under no duty to do so under the Tripartite Act. It simply stated that it would assist Japan if it was attacked. Recognizing this, when Japanese Ambassador Oshima requested that Germany declare war on America on December 8th, German Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop paused for a time. Ribbentrop was correct in recognizing the unsustainable situation in which Germany would find itself if it did so. Hitler, on the other hand, was not convinced. He was worried that the U.S. would gain a jump on Germany and declare war on it regardless. He could have also felt a feeling of responsibility to his Axis ally, frightened of a future rift. Furthermore, he believed that Japan would provide significant difficulty for the Americans, maybe even defeat. With the United States out of the way, Japan may join Germany in its fights against Russia. However, as events unfolded, this was not to be. The United States' entry into the war transformed it into a superpower because Hitler had made an uneducated decision by himself instead of listening to Ribbentrop and gave this Allied cause a much-needed punch. Hitler was only concerned with what he believed. He did not care to understand countries like America or Britain, which were countries that would do anything necessary to win the war. And this was shown in the bombing of Dresden, where the British Bomber Command hit Dresden with an 800-bomber air raid, dropping some 27 tons of bombs, including large numbers of incendiaries. Aided by weather conditions, a firestorm developed, incinerating tens of thousands of people. The U.S. 8th Air Force followed the next day with another 400 tons of bombs and carried out yet another raid by 210 bombers on February 15th. It is thought that some 25,000 to 35,000 civilians died in Dresden in the air attacks. This introduced the idea of terror bombing.
Hitler had risen to the most
Hitler did not
powerful position
understand
a
the
leader can
competition
rise
that
to
he was up
by
against.
playing off the
This
feelings
was just
of the
another
Germans
example
from
of how
losing the
Hitler
previous
believed
war
he could take
with
down
luck
anybody
and smart decisions.
without acquiring
Hitler had
the
become a
necessary
dictator.
knowledge to
Then
do
once
so.
he had gotten into the position, he showed his true agenda over the people, killing millions of innocent people because of his falsified idea about the Jewish people. He easily swept across smaller countries without much thought, which had led him to believe that he was the most powerful and did not need the help of others. And then when it came to countries like the Soviet Union and America, Hitler thought that it was going to be like the other countries he conquered, but in fact he was very wrong.